I was 67 when I called my only son and asked to borrow $22 for my wife's diabetes medicine. He laughed bitterly. Again, you two old fools are always begging for money. Money, 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 that's all you ever call about. Figure it out yourselves. I quietly thanked him and hung up. 3 days later, while counting my wife's final pills, I opened Facebook and saw him proudly showing off the diamond necklace he had just bought for his mother-in-law. That was when something inside me finally broke. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country. I'd love to know who's in this with me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but everything it's trying to say to you matters. The morning I turned 67, Patty made me a cup of coffee with 2 sugars instead of 1. And when I pointed it out, she just smiled and said, "You've earned it, Gene." That was 8 months ago. This morning, she didn't say anything at all. She just handed me the mug and watched me limp my way out to the porch, the same way she'd been watching me every morning for the past 3 months. Like she was counting steps, making sure I made it to the chair without grabbing the railing too hard. The left leg, a job site accident back in April. Nothing dramatic. I stepped wrong, coming down a ladder, felt something pop in my knee, and that was the end of 35 years of showing up with a tool belt before sunrise. The doctor said 6 months minimum. I was at month 3 and still walking like I had a brick tied to my ankle. I set the mug on the old wooden armrest and looked out at Claiborne Street. Quiet neighborhood west side of Columbus, Ohio. The Hendersons across the street were already backing their minivan out of the driveway. Mrs. Petrakis was walking her beagle past the elm tree on the corner, like she did every single morning at 7:15. Normal. Steady. The kind of ordinary that feels like a gift when everything else is shaking. "And how's the knee?" Patty leaned against the doorframe behind me, still holding her own coffee with both hands, the way she always did when it was cold enough to need the warmth. "Same as yesterday." "That's not an answer, Gene. It's the only one I've got right now." She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, and came to sit in the chair beside me. 64 years old, still had that way of settling into a seat like she belonged in it more than anyone else in the world. 28 years behind a grocery register at Kroger had given her feet that knew when to rest, and a spine that stayed straight no matter how heavy the day got. "I was thinking," she said, wrapping both hands tighter around her mug. "Maybe we call Travis today." My jaw tightened. I kept my eyes on the elm tree at the corner. "Gene." "I heard you, Patty. He's our son. I know who he is." She turned to look at me fully, then the way she did when she wanted me to stop deflecting and actually show up to the conversation. 40 years of marriage had turned that look into something I felt in my chest, more than I saw with my eyes. "He has a daughter," she said. "He has a mortgage. He has a life. That doesn't mean he forgot about us." I reached down and pressed 2 fingers against the side of my left knee, feeling the dull throb that never fully went away anymore. Travis Calloway, 36 years old. Sales manager at a real estate firm in Dublin, Ohio, the nice part of Columbus. The part with the newer sidewalks and the coffee shops that charged $9 for something they wrote your name on with a marker. "He hasn't called in 6 weeks, Patty. People get busy." 6 weeks. She looked down at her coffee. Her fingers tightened around the ceramic. She knew I was right, but Patty had never been someone who gave up on people easily. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and one of the things that had broken my heart the most over the past 2 years. I thought about the last time Travis actually sat on this porch with us. Sadie had been running around the front yard, chasing a butterfly, shrieking with that wild, uncontainable laughter that 6-year-olds produce like it costs them nothing. Travis had been on his phone for most of it. Claire had at least watched Sadie. Travis had glanced up twice. That was 14 months ago. "We'll see," I finally said. Patty nodded slowly. She reached over and patted the back of my hand, once firm, quick. The way she touched things, she didn't want to linger on too long. We sat there in the quiet of the morning, and it was a good quiet, the kind that still felt like ours. But underneath it, like a current you couldn't see from the surface, was the other thing. The thing neither of us had said out loud yet. The medicine bottle on the kitchen counter. Patty's insulin tablets, the ones her doctor had prescribed 4 months ago when her blood sugar stopped responding to diet alone. Type 2 diabetes managed with a daily oral medication that cost $22 for a 30-day supply. $22. The kind of number that should mean nothing. I knew exactly how many tablets were left in that bottle. I'd been counting every morning when I walked past the counter to get to the coffee maker. The number was getting small. The pension check from my union retirement account wasn't due for another 9 days. And our savings, the real savings, the money we'd spent 35 years building, was currently sitting in Pete Dawson's auto repair shop on Morse Road, tied up in a partnership agreement we'd signed 8 months ago. Good money. Growing money. Money we couldn't touch for another 6 weeks without penalty. $22. 9 days. A bottle getting lighter every morning. I picked up my coffee and took a long sip. Down the street, Mrs. Petrakis waved at me from the corner. I raised my mug in response. There are things a man never imagines he'll have to do. And that morning, sitting on my own porch in the neighborhood I'd lived in for 19 years, I was starting to understand that I was about to do one of them. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and burnt toast. Patty had tried to make breakfast and gotten distracted by her crossword puzzle again, the way she always did on mornings when something was sitting heavy on her mind. She never admitted it, but I'd learned to read her tells after 4 decades. I lowered myself into the chair at the kitchen table with the particular care that a bad knee demands, and watched her stand at the sink scrubbing the same plate she'd already scrubbed twice. "You're going to scrub the pattern right off that thing," I said. She set the plate in the drying rack. "I'm thinking. I can see that." She turned around and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest. Her gray hair was pulled back the way it always was in the mornings, and her eyes, still sharp as they'd ever been, were moving over my face like she was reading something written there. "Tell me what's really going on in that head of yours, Gene Calloway." I spread my hands flat on the table. 67 years of living, 35 of them spent pulling wire through walls and junction boxes, had left my palms looking like a topographical map of somewhere rough. Calluses thick as leather along the base of every finger. A scar across the right thumb from a conduit job back in 2003 that had required 4 stitches and hadn't slowed me down for a single shift. "You want the honest answer or the comfortable one?" I said. "When have I ever asked you for comfortable?" I exhaled slowly. "I don't think we should call Travis." Patty's jaw moved. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, pressing her palms flat on the table, the same way I had a mirror I hadn't asked for. "He's our son Gene, not some stranger we had a falling out with at a cookout. I know exactly who he is, Patty. That's the problem." "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at my hands. I thought about the overtime checks I'd cashed in 1998 to buy Travis a second-hand bicycle, so he wouldn't be the only kid on Claiborne Street without one. I never told him where the bike came from. I just left it on the porch on a Saturday morning with a card that said, "Happy Saturday, kid." He rode that thing until the wheels fell off. "You remember when he was in his 2nd year of college?" I said. Patty's expression shifted. She remembered. His scholarship got cut. Budget stuff, they said. We needed $4,000 by the end of the month, or he'd have to sit out a semester. I paused. You remember what I sold to cover it? Her voice came out quieter. Your father's watch. My father's watch. I nodded. The only thing my old man ever left me. Hamilton Railway Special, 1959. I'd been offered $800 for it at the shop on 5th. I took it. I looked up at her. I never told Travis where that money came from, and he never asked. Patty's eyes were glistening now, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting it. And you... I continued keeping my voice steady because one of us had to. You wore that back brace for a year and a half and told everyone it was from lifting boxes wrong. But I knew it was because you stopped buying your prescription so the money could go to his tutoring in junior year. Jean, don't. I'm not saying it to make you feel bad, Patty. I'm saying it because I need you to hear it out loud, and I need you to remember it before we talk about whether or not we call him for $22. The word hit the table between us like something physical. 22. The number that should have meant nothing. Patty reached up and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her eyes were bright and full, not quite spilling over but close. When she lowered her hand, her voice was tight. He used to call me every morning, she said. Did you know that 3 years ago, every single morning, 7:30 on the dot? Mom, did you take your pill today? Every morning, Jean. My chest felt like someone had reached in and grabbed a fist full of something vital. I know, I said. He doesn't call anymore. I know that too. She stood up and turned back to the sink, gripping the edge of the counter. Her shoulders rose and fell with one long, slow breath. Outside, the neighborhood had fully woken up lawnmowers somewhere down the block, a screen door banging shut, the ordinary percussion of a Tuesday morning in Columbus. Maybe it's just a hard season for him, she said. But her voice had lost its conviction the way a structure loses load-bearing capacity before it finally gives. She wanted to believe it. She was trying so hard to believe it. I pushed myself up from the table, walked to the counter, and stood beside her. We both looked out the window above the sink at the small backyard, the oak tree I'd planted when Travis was 9, the cracked bird bath Patty refused to let me throw away, the patch of grass near the fence where Sadie had run circles last summer, laughing like the world was made entirely for her. I'm going to call him, I said. Not because I think he'll help, but because I've never once let Patty Calloway go without her medicine, and I'm not about to start now. She turned to look at me, and the gratitude in her eyes was the kind that doesn't need words and didn't get them. Instead, she put her hand over mine on the counter's edge, warm and steady. I didn't tell her I was terrified. I didn't tell her that picking up that phone felt like standing at the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. I just held her hand and counted the hours until I had the nerve to make the call. The afternoon settled into the house the way October afternoons did, slow and colorless, the light going flat by 3 o'clock without any dramatic announcement. Patty had gone to lie down after lunch. Her ankles were bothering her again, and I had told her to rest without making it sound like an order, which required a particular kind of phrasing after 40 years with a woman who did not take well to being managed. She'd gone without argument, which told me the ankles were worse than she'd let on. I sat in the recliner with the television off and the room quiet around me and looked at the bookshelf against the far wall. The graduation photo had been in the same spot for 11 years. Travis at 22, diploma in both hands, grinning with the kind of unself-conscious joy that a person only produces before they've learned to be strategic about it. I'd put the frame there myself, level and centered, the week after I got the print back from the drugstore photo counter. I had stood outside Schottenstein Center for 3 hours and 14 minutes, to get one moment of that face coming through those doors, and I was going to put that face somewhere I could see it. I looked at it now and tried to find the man who had stood on my porch 14 months ago, phone in hand, glancing up twice while his daughter chased a butterfly in my front yard. I couldn't find him in the photo. The photo only had the boy. I thought about Sunday nights. For 3 years, his sophomore year through the spring of his senior year, Travis had called me every Sunday evening between 7 and 8. Not texts, not emails. Phone calls the old-fashioned kind, where you heard someone's voice and they heard yours, and the conversation went wherever it went. He'd call from his dorm room or from the parking lot of whatever restaurant he and his roommates had gone to, or once from a laundromat at 11 at night, because he'd waited too long to do his laundry, and the call was the only thing making the time pass. We talked about everything. Baseball standings. Whether he should change his major. A professor who graded unfairly. A girl in his economics class he wasn't sure about. He asked my opinion on things, real things, not courtesy questions. He wanted to know what I thought. I was 62 years old and smelled like wire insulation for most of my waking hours, and my son wanted to know what I thought. Those calls stopped the spring of his senior year. Not all at once, they tapered the way daylight tapered in fall, so gradually you didn't notice until one day you reached for the light switch at 5 in the afternoon and understood that something had shifted without asking your permission. He'd met Claire that spring. Claire was good. Claire was kind and smart and came from a family that had things I had never given Travis. A father who wore pressed shirts on weekends, a mother who hosted dinner parties, a house with a guest room and a kitchen that had never had a leaking faucet left unrepaired for 3 weeks because the part cost $40 I didn't have. I didn't begrudge Travis any of it. I had worked 35 years so he could have access to exactly that kind of life. I just hadn't understood that gaining it would feel to him like it required leaving something behind. The Sunday calls became bi-weekly, then monthly, then occasional, then the kind of thing that happened when he was driving somewhere with nothing better to do and remembered he hadn't checked in. I thought about the day he got his first promotion, 4 years ago. A Tuesday morning in March, 7:15, before his office had officially opened. My phone rang, and it was Travis, and his voice had that quality it used to have on Sunday evenings, unguarded, uncalibrated, just him. "Dad, I got it. Regional sales manager. They announced it this morning." I had been standing in a client's garage in my work clothes, and I had pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes and felt something expand in my chest that I didn't have the vocabulary for. "I'm proud of you, son," I said. "I mean that." "I know you do," he said. "That's why you're the first person I called." That had been 4 years ago. It felt like a different lifetime. It felt like a story about a different pair of people. I looked at Patty's prescription bottle on the kitchen counter visible through the doorway from where I sat. The rattle when I'd picked it up this morning. The number I already knew without counting. Something Travis had said on that Tuesday morning came back to me unprompted. We'd been talking about what the promotion meant. More responsibility, a bigger team, higher stakes, and he'd said almost as an aside, "You know what's funny, Dad? The thing I kept thinking about when they told me was you. All those mornings you got up before the sun. I kept thinking he did that every day for 35 years, and he never once complained where I could hear it. I want to be that kind of person. I want to be that kind of person." I sat with that for a long moment. The flat October light. The quiet house. The prescription bottle in the doorway. I reached for my phone. Travis's name was still at the top of my recent calls the last time he'd called me 6 weeks ago. A 9-minute conversation while he was driving to a client meeting in which he'd told me about a restaurant he and Claire had tried and asked if the Reds had a chance this season. Standard. surface. The kind of call that covered the space where a real one used to be. My thumb hovered over his name. I thought about what Patty had said that morning. He has a mortgage, he has a kid, he has a life. And I thought about what I hadn't said back. Which was, so did I. I had all of those things at his age, plus a wife who just left and a little boy who needed new shoes and a job that paid $12 an hour. And I still called my father every Sunday. I pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. I held it against my ear and listened to the sound of it and told myself whatever happened next, I had done the right thing by trying. Patty needed her medicine. A man didn't let his wife go without her medicine. Whatever Travis said on the other end of this call, that fact was not going to change. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Dad." Travis's voice was clipped, efficient, the voice of a man in the middle of something he considered more important than whatever was about to come out of my mouth. I could hear a keyboard clicking in the background, the low murmur of an office that never fully quieted. "What's going on? I've got a client call at 3:30. My fingers tightened around the phone. I'd rehearsed this a dozen times in my head while I sat in that recliner. I'd told myself to keep it simple, keep it calm, don't make him feel ambushed. "Hey, son. How are you? How's Sadie doing?" She's good. Started soccer this fall, she loves it." A pause. More keyboard clicking. "Listen, Dad, I really do have a call coming up. What do you need?" "What do you need? Not what's going on. Not is everything okay. Straight to the transaction." I pressed forward anyway. "I hate to ask you this, Travis. You know I don't make a habit of it. But your mom's medication, her diabetes tablets, were running low, and my pension deposit got delayed by the bank. 9 more days and it clears, but right now I'm short. It's $22 for the refill. I just need it spotted until, $22. He repeated it the way you repeat a number when you're not sure you heard correctly, except I could tell he'd heard just fine. That's all. $22. I'll pay you back the minute the deposit clears, you have my word on that." There was a pause. Not a thinking pause. A deciding pause. I knew the difference because I'd spent 35 years reading silences on job sites. The silence before a foreman said yes, and the silence before he said no. "Dad." He exhaled a long, heavy sound that made my stomach drop 3 floors. "I really am sorry, but things are so tight right now. You have no idea the kind of pressure Claire and I are under. The mortgage went up when they reassessed the property. Sadie's school has this enrichment program that costs $400 a semester, and we just had to replace the HVAC system last month. We literally just sat down and did a full budget review last week." My mouth went dry. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling above my recliner, the one I'd been meaning to fix since March. "Travis," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm not asking for $100. I'm not asking you to solve anything. It's $22 for your mother's blood sugar medication. The kind she has to take every single day or her glucose spikes and she gets dizzy and her hands start shaking. That kind of medicine." "Dad, I hear you, I do. Do you?" The words came out before I could stop them. Not angry, just tired. Tired in a way that lived in my bones. "Because 6 weeks ago you stopped calling. And now I'm asking you for $22 for your mother's health, and you're telling me about your HVAC system." A beat. Then, and this was the part that hollowed me out completely, his voice shifted into something I can only describe as careful. The voice of a man who had prepared an answer in advance. "Dad, honestly, have you guys looked into Medicaid? I think at your income level you'd both qualify. It could cover Mom's prescriptions completely. It might just be easier than you know doing this every time something comes up." Every time something comes up, I had called him once. One time in 7 years, I had called my son and asked for help, and he'd turned it into every time. I'll look into it, I said. My voice had gone flat and quiet the way it went when I was on a job site, and something had gone badly wrong, and there was no point raising your voice because the damage was already done. Good. Yeah. I really think that would help you guys long term. He sounded relieved. Actually relieved. Hey, I've got to jump, my 3:30 is pinging me. Talk soon, okay? Tell Mom I said hi. The call ended. I sat in my recliner with the phone in my lap and looked at the room around me. The bookshelf Patty and I had bought at a garage sale in 2009. The framed photo of Travis at his college graduation on the wall, the one where I wasn't in the picture because I'd been standing outside the venue for 3 hours without a ticket. The water stain on the ceiling I'd never gotten around to fixing because there had always been something more urgent. Tell Mom I said hi. From the hallway I heard Patty's footsteps. Soft, careful the walk of someone who already knew the answer, but was hoping to be wrong. She appeared in the doorway and looked at my face, and her own face did something painful and quiet that I couldn't bear to watch directly. She didn't ask. She walked to the couch, sat down beside my chair, and put her hand over mine. The room felt like it had gotten smaller, like the walls had taken one step inward while I wasn't looking. I didn't say a word because there were no words in me right then. Just the echo of a phone clicking off and a son who'd told his mother to apply for government assistance instead of sending $22. 3 days is a long time when you're counting. I counted Patty's tablets every morning, picked up the bottle from the counter beside the coffee maker, turned it in my hand, felt the rattle of what was left inside. Day 1 after the call, 6 tablets. Day 2, 5. Day 3, I didn't shake the bottle. I already knew. The pharmacy had a patient assistance line. I'd found it on their website after an hour of squinting at my phone screen. I called, sat on hold for 40 minutes listening to the same 4 bars of piano music loop back on itself, and finally spoke to a woman who told me I needed to submit a form, provide proof of income, wait 7 to 10 business days for review, and that emergency provisions were only available in, quote, documented medical crisis situations, unquote. I asked her what qualified as a documented medical crisis. She said she could email me the form to find out. I thanked her and hung up. I filled out the Medicaid paperwork that evening, the same application we'd started 2 months ago, and sent back incomplete, because they'd needed a copy of Patty's Medicare Part A card, which had taken 3 weeks to arrive. And by the time it did, we'd needed to resubmit the original form because the processing window had expired. The American bureaucratic system, I had learned, was designed by people who had never needed to actually use it. I didn't tell Patty any of this. Every morning when she reached for her bottle, I was already there. I'll get your coffee. Patty sit down, moving the bottle slightly out of her natural reach, making sure she didn't count. Every morning, she took the tablet I handed her and swallowed it with her orange juice and went to the window to check if the neighbor's dog had gotten into the yard again. Every morning I walked back to the counter and stood with my back to her for 10 seconds, composing my face back into something she wouldn't worry about. On the third evening, I was sitting in the recliner with my phone, not really looking at anything. Patty had turned in early. Her ankles had been swelling, which happened when her blood sugar climbed, which happened when stress climbed, which I was trying very hard not to think about. She'd been in bed for maybe an hour, not long enough to be deeply asleep. Not on a night like this. I opened Facebook out of pure, purposeless habit. The way you open a refrigerator when you're not hungry. Just something for your hands to do. I scrolled past a post from my old union buddy Dale about his granddaughter's softball game. Past a neighborhood alert about a coyote spotted near Tribune Road. past a furniture sale at a store I'd never been to. And then I stopped. The photo had been posted 4 hours ago. Travis had shared it from his own profile, a repost of something Sandra Hoffman had put up, with his comment tagged on top, "So proud to do something special for two incredible women. They deserve the world." The picture showed Sandra Hoffman and Claire standing together in what looked like the Hoffman's kitchen, the one with the marble island and the pendant lights I'd seen exactly once at a Christmas gathering 3 years ago that Travis had invited us to 48 hours in advance. Sandra had one hand pressed to her collarbone. Claire had both hands raised near her face. Between them on the marble counter sat an open jewelry box, black velvet, and inside it, catching the light from those pendant fixtures in a way that left absolutely no ambiguity about what it was, a necklace. Diamond pendant. Small stone, but real. The kind of real that cost what it cost. I zoomed in, my thumb and forefinger spread across the screen, and I looked at the clasp, the chain, the way the stone sat in its setting. I'd done electrical work in enough jewelry stores over the years to recognize the difference between costume and the real thing. This was the real thing. I looked at Travis's comment again. They deserve the world. My chest cracked open, not with anger, not yet just with something vast and airless that I didn't have a name for. I sat there in the dim light of the living room with the glow of the phone screen on my face and did the kind of math that you do when you already know the answer and are just making yourself confirm it. I searched the name of the jewelry store visible on the box in the corner of the photo, found their website, found their collection, found the pendant. The price was there in plain numbers, no ambiguity. I put the phone face down on my knee. From the hallway came the sound I had been dreading without knowing I was dreading it. Patty's footsteps, slower than usual, one hand brushing the wall. She appeared in the doorway to the living room. Her face in the lamplight was the color of old paper, and she was gripping the doorframe with her left hand. Jean. Her voice came out thin and papery, nothing like her regular voice. I feel dizzy. My hands they're tingling. The medicine I need. Where did I put my... I was out of the recliner before she finished the sentence, bad knee screaming, crossing the room in 3 steps. I caught her by the arm and held on. "I've got you," I said. "I've got you, Patty. Sit down right here." And as I lowered my wife into the chair that had been mine 30 seconds ago, the phone was still sitting face down on the armrest with that picture on it. The diamonds catching the light in the Hoffman's kitchen, while the woman who had given up her back medication so our son could finish college stood in my living room struggling to stay upright. I got her a glass of orange juice. That's what you do for a diabetic whose blood sugar is dropping. You get them something with fast-acting glucose. You get them sitting down, and you don't let them see the panic on your face. I'd read enough about type 2 diabetes in the 4 months since Patty's diagnosis to know the basics. I knew the symptoms of hypoglycemia. I knew the difference between a dizzy spell that would pass in 10 minutes and one that needed a hospital. This one was going to pass. But my hands were shaking as I filled the glass. "Drink this," I said, pressing it into her hands. "All of it, Patty. Don't sip it." She drank. I crouched in front of her chair, bad knee be damned, and watched the color slowly crawl back into her face. It took about 8 minutes. I counted every one of them. When she lowered the empty glass, she looked at me with eyes that were clearer, but also more frightened than I wanted to see. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was steadier now, but her hands were still trembling faintly against the glass. "How long what?" "Jean." She said my name the way she always did when she was done accepting half answers, flat and precise like a pin going through paper. "How long have you been handing me the tablet every morning?" My jaw tightened. I was still crouched in front of her eye level, and there was nowhere to look that wasn't directly at her face. 4 days, I said. The sound she made wasn't a gasp. It was quieter than that, a sharp intake of breath that she immediately tried to control, pressing her lips together so hard they went white. Her eyes filled up fast, and she blinked twice hard, refusing to let it spill over. "You told me you took care of it," she said. "I know. You looked me in the eye every morning and told me, 'I know, Patty.'" My voice cracked on the second word. I pressed my fist against my mouth for a second, got it back under control. "I didn't want you to worry. I was trying to figure it out. I thought I had more time before—" I stopped, ran a hand over my face. "I called Travis." She went very still. 4 days ago," I continued. "Before I started before the mornings. I called him and asked for $22, explained everything. The pension delay, your prescription, all of it. And I looked at the floor between us. The linoleum had a crack running from under the refrigerator to the edge of the cabinet. I'd been meaning to fix that too." "He said things were tight," I said. "Mentioned the mortgage, Sadie's school program, their HVAC." I paused. "Then he suggested we look into Medicaid." Patty's breath left her body like something had pushed it out from behind. She set the glass down on the side table with a careful, deliberate movement, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you don't control your hands. "He said that," she whispered. Not a question. "He did." She pressed both palms flat against her thighs and stared straight ahead at the bookshelf across the room. I watched her process. It watched the grief move through her face in stages the way weather moves across a sky. Disbelief first, then something wounded and raw, then a stillness that was worse than either. "Show me," she said. "Patty." "Show me the picture, Jean. I know there's a picture. You've had that phone face down since before I walked in here." I picked up the phone from the armrest, turned it over, opened Facebook, handed it to her without a word. She looked at the screen for a long time. Sandra Hoffman's kitchen, all marble and pendant lighting. Claire with her hands raised toward her face. The open jewelry box. Travis's caption glowing underneath. "They deserve the world." Patty's chin trembled. She pressed her hand over her mouth, palm flat, fingers spread, and held it there. "That's a diamond," she said through her fingers. "Yes. A real one." "Yes." She handed the phone back to me. Her hand was shaking harder now, and I didn't think it had anything to do with her blood sugar anymore. She stood up slowly, straightening her robe, smoothing it down the front with both hands, in a gesture so familiar it broke something in me. Patty had always smoothed things down when she was trying to hold herself together. "I'm going to go lie down," she said. "Patty, we don't have to—" "I'm not angry, Jean." Her voice came out soft and devastated, the two things existing in her simultaneously, without contradiction. I need a minute. I need to be in my room for a little while." She walked to the hallway. At the doorframe, she stopped her back to me, one hand resting on the wood. "He used to be such a good boy," she said. Not to me specifically. More to the hallway, to the house, to whatever was listening. Then she walked away, and the door to our bedroom clicked shut. I stayed crouched on the living room floor for longer than I should have, listening to the silence that followed. And from behind that closed door, so faint I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, came the sound I had never heard in 40 years of marriage, Patty Calloway crying alone. I didn't move from that spot for a long time. My knee was sending signals up my leg that a younger man would have called pain, and that I had long since reclassified as information that said, "Get up, Jean, the floor isn't where you handle things." So I got up. I turned off the overhead light and left the lamp on the one on the end table that threw a warmer, smaller circle of light. The house felt different at night with Patty behind a closed door. Bigger somehow. Emptier in the specific way that only happens when the person who makes a place feel like home has gone somewhere you can't follow. I sat in my recliner. The phone was still in my hand screen, dark now. Travis's caption faded back into whatever algorithm had surfaced it to ruin my evening. I set it face down on the armrest and looked at the bookshelf, at the framed photos, at the graduation picture of Travis that had been hanging there for 11 years. In the photo, he was 22 and grinning with his whole face, the uninhibited, unperformed grin of someone who hasn't yet learned to calibrate his happiness for an audience. He was holding his diploma with both hands. Claire wasn't in his life yet. The Hoffmans weren't in his life yet. I remembered that day with a precision that surprised me. I'd stood outside Schottenstein Center for 3 hours and 12 minutes in the May heat. I know because I'd checked my watch so many times that the memory of the watch face was clearer than the memory of anything else. Travis had submitted the guest ticket request late, and by the time the registration office processed it, the allocation was full. He'd texted me 2 days before the ceremony. "Sorry, Dad couldn't get you a ticket, it's complicated." I'd told him it was fine. I'd driven to Columbus anyway. I'd stood in the plaza with the food trucks and the overflow families and waited. When the doors opened and the graduates streamed out, I'd spotted him from 40 yards away. The grin, the diploma, his arm around a friend I didn't recognize. He'd seen me, waved, said, "Hey, you made it," like I'd just pulled into a parking lot, not like I'd stood in the sun for 3 hours for one moment of his face. I looked away from the photo. The end table beside my recliner had a single drawer, shallow, the kind that collects things without intending to. I opened it. Past the takeout menus, the dead batteries, I kept meaning to throw away the spare key to the side gate. My fingers found what they were looking for without needing to look. The card was a standard greeting card size, cream-colored, the kind you bought from a drugstore carousel. The envelope had my name on it, in Travis's handwriting, from when he was 19, big looping letters that hadn't yet settled into the compact, efficient print of his adult life. The card itself was 2 pages of that same handwriting, dense and slightly uphill, the way his writing always ran when he was writing fast, because he had too much to say. "Dad, I don't know how to say this right, so I'm just going to say it. I know things weren't easy. I know you worked nights so I could sleep. I know you didn't have money for a lot of things, but somehow I always had what I needed. I didn't understand that when I was a kid. I think I'm starting to understand it now. I'm going to make you proud. Not because I owe you, I know you'd hate it if I said that, but because you showed me what it looks like to just keep going. I want to be that. I want Sadie someday, when I have kids someday, to look at me the way I look at you. Sadie." He'd written Sadie before she existed, a placeholder name for a child he hadn't had yet. I folded the card back along its original crease, the paper soft and cooperative from being folded and unfolded too many times, and held it in both hands. My phone lit up on the armrest. The name on the screen hit me somewhere behind the sternum. Not Travis. Not a number I didn't recognize. The contact photo was a blurry selfie taken at arm's length, a 6-year-old with 2 missing front teeth and eyes that took up most of her face. Sadie, my thumb hovered over the green button. 6 years old, calling her grandfather at 9:15 on a Tuesday night. My heart was doing something complicated, and I answered before I could think about it too hard. "Sadie Bug." My voice came out rough at the edges, and I cleared my throat fast. "Grandpa Gene." The sound of her bright and completely unguarded, pitched at the frequency that only small children and certain birds achieve, hit me like something physical. Guess what happened at school today? Tell me everything, I said. And I meant it more than I'd meant anything all week. Whatever I'd been feeling 30 seconds before the card in my hands, the closed bedroom door, the photo on Facebook, it didn't go away. But it moved over. It made room. Because Sadie Calloway was on the phone and she had things to tell me, and for the next 10 minutes, that was the only thing in the world that mattered. I didn't move from the living room floor for a long time. My knee was sending signals up my leg that I'd long since stopped calling pain and started calling information that said, "Get up, Gene, the floor is not where you handle things." So eventually, I got up. I turned off the overhead light and left the small lamp burning on the end table, the one with the amber shade that Patty had picked up at an estate sale in 2011, and that threw a circle of light just wide enough for one person sitting in a chair. The house felt wrong with her behind a closed door. Not empty exactly. I could hear the faint sound of the ceiling fan turning in our bedroom, the familiar rhythm of it, but off balance. Like a table with one leg shorter than the others, I settled into the recliner and looked across the room at the bookshelf. At the framed photos lined up on the third shelf. At the graduation photo that had been hanging there for 11 years, Travis at 22 holding his diploma with both hands, grinning with his whole unguarded face. The grin of someone who hasn't yet learned to perform happiness for an audience. Claire wasn't in his life yet. The Hoffmans didn't exist for him yet. I could tell you the exact temperature of that May afternoon outside Schottenstein Center. 81 degrees and humid, the kind of Ohio spring that couldn't decide if it wanted to be summer yet. I'd stood in the plaza for 3 hours and 14 minutes, I know, because I kept checking the Timex on my wrist, the one I'd worn since 1987, the one I'd refused to replace because it still kept perfect time, and I had never understood replacing something that still worked. Travis had submitted the guest ticket request 4 days late. The registration office had processed it after the allocation closed. He'd texted me 2 days before the ceremony. "Sorry, Dad, ticket thing got complicated, you know how it is." I'd told him it was absolutely fine and to enjoy his day. Then I'd driven 90 minutes to Columbus and stood in the plaza with the overflow families and the food truck vendors and waited because standing outside was still closer to him than staying home. When the doors opened, he'd come out in the middle of a group of friends, diploma raised, laughing at something someone had said. He'd spotted me after a moment, and his face had done something I still couldn't fully interpret, a flash of something gone before I could name it. Then the grin wide and warm, "Hey, you made it," like I'd found parking, like I hadn't been standing in the sun for 3 hours. I looked away from the photo. The end table beside my recliner had a shallow drawer, the kind that collects things without intending to. Takeout menus from places that had since closed. A spare key to the side gate. Dead batteries I'd been meaning to throw away since February. And underneath all of it, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Travis's 19-year-old handwriting, big looping letters that slanted uphill the way his writing always did when he was moving fast, because he had more to say than his hand could keep up with. I took the card out and held it. The paper had gone soft at the folds from being opened too many times. The ink had faded slightly at the edges. Inside 2 pages of the same uphill handwriting, dense and close together, "Dad, I don't know how to do this right, so I'm just going to do it. I know things weren't easy. I know you worked nights I was sleeping. I know you stretched every dollar until it didn't want to stretch anymore. I didn't understand what that meant when I was a kid. I think I'm starting to. You never complained. Not once that I heard. And I heard pretty much everything in that house. I'm going to make you proud. Not because I owe you, I already know you'd hate that word. But because you showed me what it looks like to just keep going when keeping going is the only option. I want to be that. When I have kids, I want them to look at me the way I look at you, I folded it back along its original crease and held it in both hands. He'd been 19. He'd meant every word of it. I was as certain of that as I was of anything the handwriting alone told me. The way it pushed uphill the crossed-out words and rewrites in the margin, where he'd tried to say something and gotten it wrong and tried again. You didn't fake that kind of effort at 19. Something had changed him. Or something had been building in him all along, and I'd mistaken the early version for the finished product. My phone lit up. The contact photo was a blurry selfie taken at arm's length sometime last Christmas, a 6-year-old with 2 missing front teeth, and eyes that took up most of her small face grinning at the camera with the same unself-conscious abandon that Travis had once had, and somewhere along the way had lost. Sadie. My thumb was over the green button before I'd made a conscious decision. My throat was tight in a way I hadn't expected. Sadie Bug. My voice came out rougher than I intended, and I pressed my fist against my sternum, once hard, clearing whatever was lodged there. Grandpa Gene. She said it the way only Sadie said it, both words equally capitalized, equally urgent, like my name was an announcement. You are not going to believe what happened at school today. Tell me everything, I said. And the tightness in my throat loosened just slightly, just enough. The card was still in my other hand. The lamp was still throwing its small amber circle across the living room floor. Behind the bedroom door, Patty's ceiling fan was still turning. None of that had changed. But Sadie's voice was filling up the spaces between all of it, bright and relentless, and completely unaware that her grandfather had been sitting in the dark, holding a piece of paper, like it was the last solid thing in a room that had stopped making sense. And for the next 10 minutes, that was the only thing I needed. She talked for 11 minutes straight. I know, because the call timer was visible in the corner of my screen, and I watched it the way you watch something you don't want to end. Sadie had gotten the highest score in her class on a spelling test. Commemorate, she told me, was the word that had knocked out every other kid, and she'd spelled it correctly because she'd asked me what it meant 3 weeks ago when she'd seen it on a sign outside the public library, and I'd explained it to her while we sat on my front porch, eating the popsicles Patty kept in the freezer, specifically for Sadie's visits. I remembered what you said, she told me. You said it means when you want to remember something so much, you make it into something permanent. And I remembered that, and then I just knew how to spell it. Something moved through my chest that I didn't have a clean word for. Pride was part of it. But it was the other part that caught me off guard, the grief of it. The fact that this small person carried pieces of our conversations around inside her and pulled them out when she needed them, and that her father had not been in the same room as me in 14 months. That's exactly right, I said. I'm proud of you, Sadie Bug. Mrs. Kowalski put a star sticker on my paper. A gold one, not silver. Gold means the best. A brief pause, the sound of something rustling, her fidgeting with something on her end, the way she always did when she was transitioning between topics. Grandpa Gene, are you okay? You sound different. I pressed my back teeth together for a moment. 6 years old, and she heard it anyway. Just a little tired, sweetheart. It's been a long week. Did your leg hurt again? A little bit. Grandma Patty says you push yourself too hard. Her voice carried the particular authority of someone reporting official information. She told Mom that last time. She said you don't know how to rest. My mouth curved up despite everything, the involuntary kind of smile, the kind that happens before you decide to let it. Grandma Patty's not wrong about that. Is Grandma Patty there? Can I say hi? My chest tightened all over again. I looked toward the hallway, toward the closed bedroom door, toward the thin line of darkness at the bottom where no light was on. She's resting right now, I said. She had a long day too, but I'll tell her you called. She'll love that. Tell her I love her, Sadie said with the directness that children deploy before they learn to be self-conscious about saying true things. And that I drew her a picture of a horse. I'm going to bring it when we visit. My throat went tight enough that I had to wait a full second before answering. When are you coming to visit? Dad said maybe soon. Another rustle, something that sounded like blankets. He said it's been a while and we should probably go see you guys. He said he's been really busy, but he misses you. He misses you. I turned that phrase over in my mind, the way you turn a stone over to see what's living underneath it. Travis had not called me in 6 weeks. Travis had listened to me ask for $22 for his mother's diabetes medication and had responded by suggesting a government assistance program. Travis had spent money he didn't have on diamond jewelry for his mother-in-law and posted about it on the internet 4 hours later. But Travis had told his 6-year-old daughter that he missed me. I didn't know what to do with that, so I let it sit. You tell your dad we'd love to see you, I said. Grandma Patty's got that freezer full of popsicles and they're not going to eat themselves. Sadie laughed, that full-body, unself-conscious laugh that she'd had since she was 2 years old and that still hit me somewhere behind the ribs every single time. Grape ones. Your grandmother bought 3 boxes. Grandpa Gene, I love you so much. It came out of nowhere the way Sadie's best statements always did. No preamble, no lead-up, just the fact of it landing in the middle of everything else, like it weighed nothing when actually it weighed everything. I love you too, Sadie Bug, I said. More than you know. Now go to sleep, it's almost 10 o'clock. It's 9:30. Close enough. She laughed again and the call ended. I sat in the chair for a moment, with the phone in my lap, and the lamp still burning and the house still off balance around me. Then I stood up carefully, deliberately, the way a man stands up when he has decided to do something he's been putting off, and walked to the kitchen. I filled a glass of water. I took Patty's prescription bottle from the counter and shook it once. 4 tablets left. I set it back down exactly where it had been. Tomorrow morning I was going to that pharmacy. Bad knee, slow walk, whatever it took. I was going to talk to someone behind that counter and I was going to figure something out because Patty Calloway had given up her back medication so our son could finish college, and she was not going to go another morning without what she needed. Not while I was still standing. I turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hallway to our bedroom door. I stood there for a moment, with my hand not quite touching the wood. From inside, I could hear her breathing slow and even now finally asleep. I pressed my palm flat against the door once very gently, the way you touch something you are afraid of losing. Then I went to sleep in the recliner so I wouldn't wake her. The pharmacy on Morse Road opened at 8. I was in the parking lot at 7:53, sitting in my truck with the engine running and the heat on low, watching the lights flicker on inside through the plate glass window. My knee ached from the drive 15 minutes, nothing by anyone else's standard. But my left leg had developed strong opinions about sustained pressure on the accelerator since April. I sat with it stretched out as far as the footwell allowed and watched the pharmacist unlock the front door from the inside. Marcus Webb had worked the morning shift at this location for at least 3 years. I knew this because Patty and I had been coming here since before her diagnosis, picking up her blood pressure prescription, my occasional antibiotics. The reading glasses Patty kept buying off the rack near the register and losing within 2 weeks. Marcus was the kind of pharmacist who remembered names without looking at the prescription label. Mid-30s, wire-rimmed glasses, the particular patience of someone who had chosen a profession that required explaining the same thing to frighten people over and over again, and had made peace with that. I limped through the door at 8:02. He was already behind the counter pulling the morning's orders from the system. He looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and something in his face shifted a small recalibration, the look of someone who had been expecting a different kind of customer. "Mr. Calloway." He set down the folder in his hand. "How's Mrs. Calloway doing?" "That's actually what I came to talk to you about," I said. I told him everything. Not quickly, not in the rushed, apologetic way I'd told Travis, but plainly the way you talk to someone you trust with the actual facts. The delayed pension, the Medicaid application stalled on a missing document, the 4 tablets left in the bottle, the phone call I'd made and the answer I'd gotten. I left Travis out of that last part. Some things didn't need to be explained to be understood. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he turned to his computer, typed something, turned back. "We have manufacturer samples for her medication," he said. "It's a 30-day supply. I can't do this every month, Mr. Calloway, but I can do it today." He pulled a small white bag from under the counter and set it in front of me. "No charge. And I'm going to flag your Medicaid application in our system. There's a patient advocate here on Tuesdays and Thursdays who specifically handles delayed government approvals. I'll have her call you tomorrow morning." My hands gripped the edge of the counter. I was not going to make a fool of myself in front of this young man. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I mean that. Mrs. Calloway's been coming here for 3 years, Marcus said simply. He pushed the bag another inch toward me. "Go take care of her." I drove home with the white bag on the passenger seat. I checked it at every red light. I don't know what I was afraid of, that it would disappear maybe. That it would turn out I'd imagined a 30-something pharmacist choosing to be decent to a 67-year-old man on a Tuesday morning. Patty was in the kitchen when I got back. She was sitting at the table with her crossword puzzle and a cup of tea gone cold. And when I set the bag down in front of her, she looked at it, then looked at me, then pressed her lips together hard. "Marcus Webb," I said. She nodded once, picked up the bag, didn't open it right away, just held it in both hands the way you hold something you weren't sure was coming. I gave her a few minutes and then went to sit in the recliner. I called Pete. He picked up on the second ring over the sound of an air compressor running somewhere in the background, the familiar percussion of his shop on Morse Road, the place we'd put 30 years of savings into 8 months ago when Pete had offered us a share of the expansion. "Gene." His voice was different from usual, careful. "I was going to call you today." "Pete," I said slowly, "what did Travis say to you?" A long exhale. The air compressor cycled off in the background. "He came in 4 days ago," Pete said. "Tuesday afternoon. Said he was in the neighborhood, wanted to stop in and see how things were going." A pause. I thought it was nice at first. You know how I always liked that kid. But then he started asking questions, real specific questions. About the investment. When's the next distribution? What's the projected return for Q4? Whether it was possible to do an early partial withdrawal, and what the penalty structure would look like. Pete's voice had taken on the flat, careful tone of a man who had been in business long enough to recognize when he was being surveyed. "Gene, I've been in this game for 30 years. I know the difference between someone asking because they're curious and someone asking because they need." My jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the timeline was between me and my partners, and that any questions about distributions should go through you directly." Another pause. "And then yesterday I ran into Dale Hofstetter from the union. You know, Dale Big Guy coached Travis's Little League back in 2001. Dale mentioned he'd seen Travis at the Riverboat Casino out on 270 3 times in the past 2 months. 3 times that Dale knew about." The recliner creaked as I sat forward. "Pete, I know." His voice was quiet. Jean, I called Gerald Hoffman this morning. I know that's not my place, and I'll take whatever you want to give me for it. But I've known you for 30 years, and I wasn't going to sit on this. My hand was pressed flat against my sternum without me having decided to put it there. Gerald Hoffman. A man I had shared exactly 4 extended conversations with in 7 years of being connected to his family. What did you tell him? I asked. Everything I just told you, Pete said. He didn't say much. But before he hung up, he said, and I'm quoting him exactly here, Jean, he said, I'll handle it. I sat in that recliner for a long time after the call ended, listening to the sound of Patty moving around in the kitchen, the familiar small sounds of her, the cabinet door, the spoon against the mug, the crossword pages turning. I didn't know what Gerald Hoffman handling something looked like, but I had the distinct feeling I was about to find out. The next morning arrived gray and reluctant. October in Columbus had that quality the sky couldn't commit to anything, hanging low and colorless over the rooftops on Claiborne Street, like it was waiting for someone to make a decision on its behalf. I'd slept in the recliner again, partly because my knee appreciated the angle, and partly because I didn't want to wake Patty by coming to bed at 2 in the morning, after sitting with my thoughts until they finally wore themselves out. She found me there at 7, already awake with cold coffee and the classified section of the paper I'd stopped reading 6 months ago, but still received out of a stubbornness I couldn't fully justify. You didn't sleep, she said. Not an accusation, a diagnosis. I slept fine on my xinta, I said. Jean. She was standing in the doorway in her robe, and her eyes had that morning precision to them. The sharpness that came before the day had a chance to soften anything. You've got the classified section open to the jobs page. You've been retired for 8 months. I looked down at the paper. She was right. I closed it. Pete called yesterday, I said. After I got back from the pharmacy, I told her what Pete had said. I kept my voice level, and I watched her face as I went through it. Travis at the shop, the specific questions about distributions and early withdrawal penalties, Dale Hofstetter, and the casino out on 270. Patty sat on the couch across from me, and her face moved through expressions the way a landscape moves through weather. Very little she could do to stop it. Very little she tried to. The riverboat, she said when I finished. Her voice was flat. 3 times that Dale knew about. That's what Pete said. Travis doesn't. He never mentioned gambling. Not to me. Not once. No, I said. He didn't. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs, the smoothing gesture, the holding together gesture. And Pete called Gerald Hoffman. This morning, before he called me, Patty looked at the window. Outside, Mrs. Petrakis was walking her beagle past the elm tree, same as every morning, indifferent to the fact that everything in our house had shifted 3 degrees off its axis. Patty watched the dog disappear around the corner, and then she said very quietly, Gerald Hoffman. I know. Jean, that man has never... She stopped. Pressed her lips together, started again. In 7 years, that man has come to this house exactly 0 times. He shook your hand at Sadie's baptism and spent the rest of the afternoon talking to his college roommate about a golf trip. I remember. So what does Pete calling him accomplish? Gerald Hoffman is not going to... The knock at the front door stopped her mid-sentence. We looked at each other, and before either of us could move, there was a second knock. Firm, deliberate, the knock of someone who had driven a distance and intended to be heard. I got up from the recliner, crossed the living room, and opened the door. Gerald Hoffman was standing on my front porch. He was dressed in a button-down shirt, tucked into pressed slacks, the default uniform of a man who had run a transportation business for 30 years. and didn't fully know how to dress for anything that wasn't either a boardroom or a golf course. But the shirt was slightly wrinkled in a way it wouldn't have been if he'd planned this trip the night before, and his jaw was set with the particular tension of a man who had been arguing with himself the entire drive over. He was holding a manila folder under his left arm. He looked at me. I looked at him. The October air moved between us, cold and indifferent. "Mr. Calloway," he said. His voice was more controlled than his face was. "I know I'm the last person you expected to see standing here. I almost didn't come. A beat. I need about an hour of your time, if you'll give it to me." I stepped back from the door and opened it wider. "Come in," I said. He crossed the threshold into my living room. This man who had looked at my calloused hands the first time we met and found them wanting, and I watched him take in the room. The second-hand bookshelf, the framed photos, the water stain on the ceiling I still hadn't fixed, the prescription bottles lined up on the kitchen counter visible through the doorway. His eyes stopped on those bottles. Something moved across his face that I hadn't seen there before and couldn't immediately name. "Have a seat," I said. "I'll get you some coffee." "I don't need coffee," he said and sat down. He set the folder on the table between us and put both hands flat on top of it. He was a 68-year-old man who had built something from nothing, same as me, by different means. And right now he looked like a man who had discovered that something he'd built had a crack running through the foundation that he'd been too comfortable to look for. "Mr. Calloway," he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter and more effortful. "I owe you a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. And I owe you an apology before a single word of it." From the hallway behind me, I heard Patty's footsteps stop. She had come to stand in the doorway between the hall and the living room, one hand resting on the frame. Gerald Hoffman looked up and saw her. He straightened in his chair like he'd been caught at something. And then, and this was the thing I would carry with me long after everything else had settled, he looked her in the eyes and said simply, "Mrs. Calloway, I'm sorry it took me this long. Before we go any further, type Jean in the comments if you're still here with me." What Gerald Hoffman was about to say had been sitting in that folder the entire time, and not a single person in that room was ready for it. A note: portions of this story include fictional elements for educational purposes. You're welcome to step away anytime if that's not your preference. Patty came into the living room and sat down on the couch without being asked. That was how I knew she understood this was not a conversation to be overheard from a hallway. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight in the way she always sat when she was preparing to receive something difficult, the posture she'd developed in 28 years of standing behind a register and listening to customers explain why they were returning something that was clearly their own fault. Jerry Hoffman looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the folder. "I'm going to tell you some things," he said, "that Travis told me and Sandra over the past few years. And then I'm going to tell you what I found out this week. And I need you to understand that I am not here to make excuses for myself. I'm here because what I found out made it impossible for me to stay home." I leaned forward in my recliner, forearms on my knees. "Go ahead." Jerry pressed his palm flat on the folder. "Travis told us that you, Jean, weren't present when he was growing up. That you worked nights, but not because you had to. Because you preferred it. Because being home was something you avoided." The air in the room changed. I felt the words land in my chest like something thrown hard from a short distance. I opened my mouth, and Patty's hand came out and touched my arm, not to stop me, just to say, "I'm here, I feel it too, keep listening." "Now he told us," Jerry continued, his voice losing some of its boardroom steadiness, now roughening at the edges, "that Patty had a habit of calling him for money, that it had been going on since he graduated college, that the calls had gotten more frequent, and that he felt, and I'm using his word, suffocated by the financial expectations. Patty made a sound, not a word. Just a single sharp exhale like someone had pressed a fist into her sternum without warning. Her hands tightened in her lap until her knuckles went pale. "I never called that boy for money," she said. Her voice was low and precise and shaking slightly at the foundation. "Not once. Not one single time in 36 years did I call my son and ask him for money. I didn't even call him for the $22. Gene did. Because I didn't want to put that on him." Jerry looked at her directly. "I believe you," he said. "I believe you completely. And I am sitting here in your living room instead of making a phone call because I needed you to hear me say that to your face." Patty pressed her lips together, nodded once, looked at the window. "There's more," Jerry said. "Tell us," I said. He turned a page in the folder. "Travis told me that Eugene had a bad debt history, that you'd borrowed money from people and not repaid it, that this was why he kept his financial situation private from you because he was afraid you'd ask to borrow from him." I laughed. It came out short and involuntary, the laugh of a man who has just heard something so far from the truth that his body doesn't know what other response to produce. "I have had one debt in my adult life," I said. "A mortgage that I paid off in 2019. I have the paperwork in that drawer right there if you want to see it." "I don't need to see it," Jerry said. He looked tired. Not the tiredness of a long drive, the tiredness of a man who had spent several days dismantling something he'd spent years constructing. "Gene. He told me you weren't at his graduation because you chose not to come, that you told him you had a job that day." The room got very quiet. I looked at the graduation photo on the shelf. Travis at 22 with his whole unguarded face. "I stood outside Schottenstein Center for 3 hours and 14 minutes, I said. "I didn't have a ticket because he submitted the request late and the allocation closed. I drove 90 minutes. I stood in the plaza in 81-degree heat. He came out, saw me, said, 'Hey, you made it,' like I'd found a parking spot." Jerry closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were bright in a way that had nothing to do with joy. "His wedding," Jerry said. "We got the address change with 2 hours' notice," Patty said. Her voice had gone flat in the way that voices go flat when they are carrying more than they were designed for. "We drove straight there. The ceremony was over. Travis said the venue coordinator had sent the update and assumed we'd gotten it." She paused. "He didn't look surprised to see us arrive late." Jerry's jaw tightened. He pulled another page from the folder and set it on the table without speaking. It was a printed screenshot, a text message thread, Travis's name at the top. The recipient was Sandra, Jerry's wife. I leaned forward and read it. Travis had texted Sandra 4 months ago, "Mom, I know Dad likes Gene, but I really need you to help keep them from spending too much time together. Gene has a way of twisting things, and I don't want Dad getting a skewed picture of our situation. Can you just kind of redirect if it comes up? It would mean a lot to me." And Sandra had responded, "Of course, sweetheart. I'll handle it." Patty read it over my shoulder. She straightened up slowly the way a person straightens when the last piece of a puzzle drops into place, and the picture it reveals is worse than they prepared for. "She didn't know," Jerry said. "Sandra didn't know what she was helping him hide. She thought she was managing family dynamics. She found out what it actually was 2 days ago, and she hasn't taken the necklace off the dresser since." "Where is she now?" I asked. "Home," Jerry said. "She wanted to come. I told her I needed to do this part alone." He paused. "She'll be at the other thing. When we do the other thing." I looked at him. What other thing? Jerry met my eyes across the coffee table. For a moment, neither of us said anything, and I want to be clear that this was not the silence of two men with nothing to say. This was the silence of two men who had just arrived at the same destination by completely different roads and were standing at the same door for the first time, both of them a little stunned to find the other one there. "Gene," he said, "I think it's time Travis sat down with all of us in the same room." Patty reached over and put her hand on top of mine on the armrest. Her grip was firm and warm, and she held on like she meant it. And I thought, not for the first time that week, but for the first time with any clarity, that whatever came next, I was not going into it alone. Jerry didn't move to close the folder. He turned another page, and I understood that what we'd heard so far was not the full inventory, that he had organized this deliberately. The way a man who ran a business organized a difficult presentation, saving the most significant items for when his audience had been prepared to receive them. "There's something else," he said. "And this part I need you to know, I didn't go looking for this. Claire brought it to me." Patty's hand tightened on mine. "Claire found it 3 weeks ago," Jerry said. "She'd noticed some irregularities in their monthly expenses, amounts that didn't match the joint account statements. She thought it was a billing error at first. She asked Travis about it twice. He told her it was a work reimbursement delay, that the accounting department was slow." He paused. "The third time she asked, he wasn't home. So she went through the mail." He set a stapled packet of papers on the table. Bank statements, not the joint account I recognized from the few times I'd seen Travis handle paperwork at family gatherings, but a separate account entirely. The name on the header was Travis R. Calloway. The account had been opened 14 months ago. I looked at the transaction history. The deposits were irregular, varying amounts, nothing with a clear pattern. The withdrawals were not. 40 rows down the first page, the same 3 vendor names repeated with the regularity of a utility bill: riverboatcasino.com, ohiopokerroom.net, Gold State Gaming LLC. "Gambling accounts," I said. "Online gambling platforms," Jerry said. "Legal in Ohio as of last year." The deposits into this account came from their home equity line of credit. Travis had opened a HELOC 18 months ago. Claire didn't know because he handled their finances, and she trusted him to do it. Patty made a sound low in her throat that wasn't quite a word. "The necklace," Jerry continued, "was purchased on a credit card in Travis's name only, not a joint card. The limit was $12,000. He maxed it in one transaction." He turned the page. "He's currently carrying debt across 4 accounts, totaling—" He looked at the number on the page as though he was hoping it had changed since the last time he'd read it, $63,000. The number sat in the room with us, $63,000. My son, who had told me he couldn't find $22 for his mother's diabetes medication, was $63,000 in debt across accounts his wife didn't know existed. "Gene." Jerry's voice had changed again, lower now, stripped of the careful structure he'd been using to keep himself together. He leaned forward. "There's one more thing. Claire found this in his email drafts. He never sent it. It was saved as his draft. She forwarded it to me yesterday morning." He set a single printed page on top of the stack. It was an email, addressed to a name I didn't recognize, 2 initials and a last name that Pete's description of loan collection practices made instantly legible. The subject line was empty. The body read, "Working on getting access to a significant amount of liquid capital in the next 30-60 days. My parents have a partnership investment that's about to pay out. I'll have your full amount plus interest by end of Q4. I just need you to hold off on the calls. My parents have a partnership investment. I read the line 3 times. Then I set the paper down on the coffee table very carefully, because I was aware that my hands were not entirely steady, and I did not want to give them anything breakable to hold. He was going to take it, I said. Not a question. He was planning to ask for it, Jerry said. Whether he would have taken it if you'd said no, I can't tell you that. But he was planning to present it as a loan and use it to pay off a debt collector. Patty stood up. She walked to the kitchen doorway, turned her back to us, and gripped the door frame with both hands. Her shoulders were shaking, not with crying, I didn't think, but with the physical effort of containing something that didn't have a clean outlet. Patty, I said. Give me a minute, Jean. Her voice came out rough and compressed. Just give me 60 seconds. I gave her 60 seconds. Jerry sat without moving, hands flat on the folder, looking at the table. When Patty turned back around, her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. She walked back to the couch and sat down. What do we do? She said. She was looking at Jerry when she said it, directly at him without flinching. Jerry looked back at her with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not pity, not the polite concern of a man managing a social situation. Something simpler and more effortful than that. Something that looked, if I was reading it right, like respect. We sit down together, he said. All of us, Travis included. And we stop letting him tell different stories to different rooms. He reached across the table and extended his hand to me. Not a social gesture, something deliberate with weight behind it. I took it. His grip was firm. The grip of a man who had spent 30 years building something with his hands, different hands than mine, softer in the places mine were rough, but carrying the same specific weight of someone who understood what it meant to build slowly and lose quickly. Jean-Yves, he said, I spent 7 years thinking I knew what kind of man you were. I was wrong, and I'd like to spend whatever time we have fixing that if you'll let me. I held his hand for a moment longer than a handshake required. Outside, a car passed on Claiborne Street, and somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something that had already moved on. The world outside was exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. Everything inside the house was different. 3 days. That was how long it took to move from Jerry Hoffman sitting in my living room with a folder full of devastation to the 4 of us being ready to be in the same room as Travis at the same time. 3 days doesn't sound like much. But when you are 67 years old and you have spent the better part of a week discovering that your son has been constructing an alternate version of your life and distributing it to people you had to share holidays with, 3 days is its own kind of long. Jerry and I met twice at a diner on Bethel Road, a place called Hank's that had been there since 1974 and still served coffee in ceramic mugs that weighed half a pound each. We sat in the corner booth both times away from the window and spread the documents between us the way men spread maps when they are trying to figure out where they took the wrong turn. The first morning Pete Dawson came too. He drove over from the shop on his lunch break, still in his work shirt with the Dawson's auto-embroidered patch on the chest, and sat across from Jerry with the particular directness of a man who had spent 30 years dealing with people who tried to tell him their engine problems were someone else's fault. The numbers he asked about, Pete said, setting his coffee mug down. He wanted to know if there was the mechanism for one partner to request a distribution outside the scheduled cycle. I told him there wasn't. He asked if that was a hard rule or a practical one. Pete looked at Jerry. That's not a casual question. That's a man doing reconnaissance. Jerry nodded slowly. He told me 6 months ago that the investment with you was Jean's idea and that Jean had pressured Patty into it. That Patty had reservations but didn't feel she could say no. Pete stared at him. Patty Calloway suggested the partnership. She called me. She called me not Gene. She said Gene needed something to feel useful about while his knee healed, and she thought having a stake in something growing would help him get through the recovery. He shook his head slowly. I have the voicemail if anyone needs to hear it. I pressed my palm flat on the table. Nobody needs to hear it, Pete. We believe you. I know you do, Pete said. I just want it on record that I have it. The second morning, it was just Jerry and me. He brought an additional document, a printout. Claire had given him a credit card statement showing the jewelry purchase. The necklace had cost $4,300. Travis had bought one for Sandra, one for Claire on the same transaction. $8,600 on a card with a $12,000 limit, leaving $3,400 in available credit that had since been drawn down to zero in smaller transactions Pete might have recognized from the casino vendor names. Claire didn't know about the card, Jerry said. He wrapped both hands around his mug. His voice was doing the thing it had been doing since the first morning, fighting to stay level and not quite winning. She found the statement in his laptop bag when she was looking for a phone charger. She sat in the kitchen for 2 hours before she called me. How is she doing? I asked. Jerry looked at his coffee. She's angry, he said. In the way that women get angry when they've been methodical about trusting someone and find out the methodology was being used against them. She's not hysterical. She's organized. He paused. She put together a spreadsheet. I didn't know whether to feel admiration or grief for my daughter-in-law. I settled on both. Sandra had called Jerry the second evening to say she wanted to be there. She'd taken the necklace off the morning Jerry had shown her the full picture and hadn't put it back on. She'd also apparently called 3 friends she'd told about the gift and corrected the story she'd given them, which Jerry described simply as not easy for her, with the understatement of a man who had been married to Sandra Hoffman for 41 years. She's angrier at herself than at Travis, Jerry said. She keeps saying she should have asked more questions. She trusted her son-in-law, I said. That's not a character flaw. Jerry looked at me for a moment with an expression I was still learning to read on his face, something that had replaced the careful social pleasantness he'd operated behind for 7 years with something more unguarded and more tired. No, he said. I suppose it isn't. Travis didn't know I was coming. That had been a deliberate choice, Jerry's suggestion, and I'd agreed with it immediately. Travis knew there was a family meeting at his in-laws' house. Jerry had told him it was about the financial situation, that Claire had found the statements, and they needed to talk as a family. Travis had apparently agreed with the particular false calm of a man who believed he still had enough control over the narrative to manage the outcome. He didn't know Pete had talked. He didn't know Jerry had been to my house. He didn't know Gene Calloway was going to walk through that door. I was sitting in the passenger seat of Jerry's Buick when he asked me the question. We were 2 turns from his house, passing the elementary school where Sadie had started first grade in September, and the crossing guard was helping a woman with a stroller navigate the intersection. Gene, Jerry said, eyes on the road. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we're in that room, there's no version of today that puts things back the way they were. I watched the crossing guard wave the stroller through. I thought about Patty at the kitchen table that morning, pressing my hand between both of hers before I walked out the door. She'd looked up at me and said, "You tell the truth in there, Gene Calloway. Whatever else happens, you tell the truth." Jerry, I said. Things stopped being the way they were the night I sat in my living room and listened to my wife cry behind a closed door because she didn't have $22 for her medication. I turned to look at him. I've been ready for this since that night. I just didn't have anyone to do it with. Jerry was quiet for the remaining 2 turns. He pulled into the driveway of the house I had been inside exactly 3 times in 7 years, a colonial with a stone front and a 2-car garage, and the kind of landscaping that required professional maintenance. He put the car in park and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad Pete called me." "So am I," said. We got out of the car. I straightened my jacket, the good one, the charcoal gray I'd bought for Sadie's baptism, and walked to the front door behind Jerry. He unlocked it with his key and pushed it open. Travis was sitting on the couch in the living room. Claire was in the armchair across from him, a legal pad on her knee, a pen in her hand. Her posture, the posture of a woman who had been preparing for this conversation with the thoroughness of someone who taught 28 children to read every year and understood that preparation was not optional. Sandra was standing near the fireplace. Travis looked up when the door opened. He saw Jerry. He started to say something. Then his eyes moved past Jerry's shoulder and found my face. Whatever he had been planning to say stopped somewhere between his brain and his mouth. His face did 3 things in rapid succession: surprise, recalculation, and then the practiced smile, the one I had watched him develop over the past 7 years, like a man installing new software over an old operating system. "Dad," he said, the smile already fully assembled. "What are you doing here?" And I looked at my son, really looked at him the way you look at something when you are finally ready to see it clearly. And I did not smile back. Jerry closed the front door. The sound of its solid final, the click of a well-made latch, seemed to reorganize the air in the room. Travis was still standing, the smile working hard on his face the way a load-bearing wall works hard when something above it has shifted. Claire set her legal pad on the armrest and uncapped her pen. Sandra turned from the fireplace and crossed her arms over her chest. Not defensively, I thought, but like she was holding herself together from the outside in. "Have a seat, Travis," Jerry said. "Dad, I just want to understand why." "Sit down, son." Jerry's voice had the quality of someone who had run payroll for 60 employees for 30 years. It didn't raise. It didn't have to. Travis sat. Jerry remained standing. He set the folder on the coffee table between them and placed one hand on top of it, the way you place a hand on something to establish that it belongs to you. "I'm going to ask you something," Jerry said, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Not because I'm trying to trap you, but because the answer you give is going to tell me whether we can have an honest conversation today or whether we are going to have to do this a different way." He looked at Travis steadily. "The jewelry, the necklaces for your mother and Claire. Where did that money come from?" Travis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I saved up. I'd been putting money aside for Travis." Claire's voice cut across the room with the precision of someone who had been waiting 3 weeks to use it. She picked up the legal pad, turned it around, and held it up so Travis could see the page. It was a printed spreadsheet attached with a binder clip, columns of dates, amounts, and vendor names. "I need you to look at this before you finish that sentence." Travis looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes, a rapid internal calculation that his face couldn't quite conceal. "That's a credit card account," Claire said, setting the pad back on her knee. "In your name only. I found the statement 3 weeks ago in your laptop bag. I've had 3 weeks to go through every transaction. So I'm asking you to think very carefully about whether you want to tell me and your father that you saved up." Travis shifted in his seat. "Claire, that account was for business expenses that I needed to keep separate from our joint riverboatcasino.com, Claire said. She wasn't shouting. Her voice was level, and she read from the pad like she was reading a grocery list. which somehow made it worse. OhioPokerRoom.net, Gold State Gaming LLC. These are your business expenses. The smile collapsed. Not all at once, it came down the way a structure comes down, when the support beneath it is removed piece by piece, faster than you'd expect once it starts. It got out of hand, Travis said. His voice had lost its shape. It started small and it got out of hand, and I was going to handle it. I just needed $63,000, Jerry said. He said the number, the way you say a number you have had to make yourself say so many times in private that the public version comes out very flat. Across 4 accounts, including a HELOC on your house that your wife didn't know existed, a home equity line of credit, which means you borrowed against a home that belongs to both of you without telling her. Claire pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was rigid, and she was not going to cry in this room. I could see that clearly. She had decided that before she walked in. Travis turned to her. Claire, I was going to tell you. I was waiting until I had a plan to fix it so you wouldn't have to worry. You were waiting, Claire said through her hand, until my father's business partner called my father because my husband showed up at his garage asking how quickly he could access my in-laws' investment money. She lowered her hand. Her voice was shaking now, but she kept it moving forward. That's what you were waiting for, Travis. An opportunity. Travis's face went through something complicated. He turned to me. Dad, he said, and his voice changed when he said it got softer, more desperate, reaching for something he must have hoped was still there. Dad, you have to understand the pressure I've been under. The job, the house trying to provide for Claire and Sadie, trying to be enough for everyone all the time. You know what that's like. You did it for years. I made some mistakes trying to keep everything together. My hands were flat on my thighs. I felt the words land, and I felt the pull of them, the old pull, the one that had operated in me for 36 years. The reflex to reach for my son when he said he was struggling. I let it pass. Travis, I said, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without interrupting me. Can you do that? He nodded. 3 months ago, your mother was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. She needs a daily medication to manage her blood sugar. Without it, she gets dizzy. Her hands shake. Her glucose spikes to levels that over time do serious damage. I kept my voice even. The medication costs $22 a month. Last month, my pension deposit was delayed by 9 days. We had 4 tablets left and $23 in the checking account, and a Medicaid application stuck in processing because one form had been submitted with a wrong document. I paused. I called you. I asked you for $22. Travis's mouth opened slightly. You told me things were tight, I said. You mentioned your mortgage. You mentioned Sadie's enrichment program. You mentioned the HVAC system. I looked at him steadily. Then you told me to look into Medicaid, and 4 days later I saw the photograph on Facebook of the necklaces you'd bought for Sandra and Claire. Sandra made a sound near the fireplace, a short, compressed sound, like air leaving a punctured tire. She reached up and pressed her fingers against her collarbone where the necklace had been. Travis, Jerry said, you told me that Jean was financially irresponsible, that Patty called you regularly for money, that Jean hadn't attended your graduation by choice. He took a breath. Pete Dawson told me what you asked him at the shop. Claire showed me the email draft you wrote to your debt collector. The one where you mentioned your parents' investment. He laid the printed email on the coffee table face up. So I need you to tell me not the version you've been telling each room separately. The actual version. What is true? Travis looked at the email. He looked at Claire. He looked at Sandra. He looked at Jerry. And then he looked at me. And whatever he was looking for in my face, he didn't find it, because I had stopped offering it to him the night I listened to Patty cry behind a closed door. His shoulders dropped. The last of the assembled confidence left him the way heat leaves a room when the furnace shuts off gradually, then all at once. I don't know how it got this far, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. I kept thinking I'd fix it before anyone had to know. I kept thinking I had more time. He pressed his face into his hands. And I sat across from my son, this man. I had worked double shifts, for sold my father's watch, for stood outside a graduation venue for 3 hours in the May heat for, and I felt something I had not expected to feel in that room. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. I felt for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, like the truth was finally in the same room as the people it belonged to. Travis lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were red at the rims, and his cheeks were blotched in the way that happens when a man who doesn't cry very often finds himself doing it in a room full of people he has wronged. He looked around at each of us in turn, at Claire with her legal pad, at Sandra with her arms crossed, and her collarbone bare where the necklace used to sit, at Jerry standing with his hand still on the folder, and then his eyes settled on me with an expression I recognized from 36 years of fatherhood. The expression that said, "You're the one who has to forgive me, so you're the one I'm going to aim at." "Atada, Dad," he said, and his voice had the particular softness of a man deploying a tone he had found effective before. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've let you down. But you have to understand, you were never easy to talk to about this stuff. The financial stuff, the pressure stuff. You always made me feel like I needed to have everything figured out before I could come to you. Like asking for help was the same as admitting failure." The room went very still. I felt Claire's eyes move to me. I felt Jerry shift his weight. I did not look away from Travis. "I see what you're doing," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended, not soft, but low the way a motor runs low and steady before it reaches full power. "You've run out of explanations, so now you're trying to make this about me. About something I did or didn't do that caused all of this." I leaned forward in my seat. "So let me make sure I understand your argument. I made you feel like you couldn't ask for help, and that's why you asked Pete Dawson reconnaissance questions about our retirement investment, so you could take the money to pay off a debt collector. Is that what we're saying?" Travis's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Because here's what I remember," I continued. "I remember that you called me when you got your first promotion. Not Claire, not Jerry, me. At 7:15 in the morning before the office had opened because you said I was the first person you wanted to tell." I held his gaze. "That was 4 years ago. And that man, the one who called his father at 7:15 in the morning because he was proud and he wanted to share it, that man never once seemed afraid to talk to me." Travis pressed his lips together. His jaw was working. "Something changed," I said. "And I don't know exactly what it was or exactly when it happened, but I know it wasn't my telephone manner, Travis. Something changed in you. And instead of telling anyone about it, you built a room around it and started furnishing it with other people's money and other people's reputations." "Jean." Sandra stepped forward from the fireplace. Her voice was not unkind, but it was firm in the way that a woman's voice gets firm when she has decided to stop protecting someone at her own expense. "I want to say something. Travis, I need you to hear this from me directly." She unfolded her arms and stood with her hands at her sides. You texted me 4 months ago and asked me to keep your father from spending time with Jean. You told me Jean had a way of twisting things. I believed you. I redirected Jerry twice when he mentioned going to see the Callaways. I thought I was helping keep the peace. Her voice tightened. I was helping you keep a secret, and I am not willing to let that stand without saying it out loud in front of everyone in this room. Travis's face had gone the particular pale of a man watching the last exit close off behind him. I didn't mean for you to. I know what you meant, Sandra said. That's the problem. Claire stood up. She set the legal pad on the armchair and walked to the window, keeping her back to the room for a moment, gathering herself with the visible effort of someone who has been holding something for 3 weeks and is choosing carefully how and when to put it down. Travis, she said, still facing the window. I have spent 11 months telling myself that the distance I felt from you was normal, that it was stress, that it was the mortgage and the job and the adjustment of having Sadie in school. She turned around. Her eyes were dry and fierce and full of something that was going to take her a long time to fully process. I went through your laptop bag looking for a phone charger, Travis, and I found out that my husband had borrowed against our home, opened accounts I didn't know about, and was planning to ask his parents for money to cover debts I didn't know existed. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum. I am not angry that you struggled. I am angry that you made me a stranger to our own life. Travis pushed himself to his feet. Claire, if we could just talk privately without... Sit down, Travis. Jerry's voice was not loud, but it landed with the specific authority of a man who had spent 3 days deciding exactly how much he was willing to tolerate and had arrived at the answer. Travis sat. Jerry reached into the folder one final time and set the email draft on the coffee table, the one addressed to the debt collector, the one that mentioned my parents' investment. He turned it so Travis could read his own words. My parents have a partnership investment. Jerry read aloud, not because anyone needed to hear it again, but because he wanted Travis to hear his own words in someone else's voice. That's what you wrote. Not I have an investment. Not there's money coming. You wrote my parents. He closed the folder. You were going to take their retirement money. Money that Patty Callaway suggested putting into Pete's shop specifically because she wanted Jean to have something to feel hopeful about while his knee healed. You were going to take it to pay off gambling debts and tell them it was a loan. Travis stared at the table. I want you to stand up, Jerry said. I want you to look at Jean Callaway and I want you to tell him the truth. Not an explanation, not a reason. The truth about the phone call, about the $22. Travis stood up slowly. He turned to face me. His hands were hanging at his sides and his face was stripped of everything he had walked in, with the ease, the practiced smile, the competent son-in-law surface he had been maintaining for 7 years. I had the money, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. When you called, I had $22. I had more than $22. He stopped. His chin was trembling. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to start. I didn't want it to become a thing where you needed me. I didn't want to be the person you called. I sat with those words for a long moment. I didn't need to say anything in response. The room had already said everything. Claire had her arms wrapped around herself by the window. Sandra had turned back to the fireplace. Jerry was looking at his son-in-law with the expression of a man who has dismantled something he built badly and is standing in the rubble figuring out what was worth keeping. And Travis was standing in the middle of all of it, finally out of rooms to retreat, to finally out of stories to tell. I looked at my son, and I felt the full weight of 36 years, every overtime shift, every sold belonging, every sleepless night. And I understood that this moment was not the end of something. It was the first true beginning we had managed in a very long time. A week passed. Claire changed the locks on the house she and Travis shared in Dublin and filed for divorce with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Jerry retained a family law attorney on Claire's behalf. Travis moved into an extended stay motel on Morse Road, 2 miles from Pete's shop, in a room that cost $68 a night and that he was paying for on the last credit card that hadn't been maxed. I knew these things because Jerry called me, not with the careful managed politeness of a man fulfilling an obligation, but the way a person calls someone they have started to consider a friend in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon to say, "Here's where things are. I thought you'd want to know." Patty and I moved through that week, the way you move through the days after something large has shifted, carefully aware of changed weight distribution, testing the floor before you put your full weight on it. She was sleeping better now that the Medicaid application had been approved 3 days after the meeting at the Hoffman's house. Marcus Webb's patient advocate had called on a Thursday morning, spent 40 minutes on the phone with Patty working through the final document requirements, and by the following Monday, the coverage was active. $22 a month covered. It was a Thursday evening when I heard the knock. Patty was in the kitchen finishing the dishes. I was in the recliner with a baseball game on low. The Reds were losing, which was not unusual. And the knock came at 7:43, soft and uncertain, the knock of someone who had stood on the porch for a minute before committing to it. I knew before I opened the door. Travis was standing on the front porch of the house he had grown up visiting. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that was clean but not pressed, and he looked like a man who had been sleeping on a motel mattress for a week and eating from a vending machine, and spending a great deal of time alone with his own thoughts. His eyes were shadowed. His jaw carried 3 days of growth that he hadn't decided yet whether to call a beard or an oversight. He looked at me and opened his mouth, and then closed it again, which was, I reflected, the most honest thing I had seen him do in several years. "Dad," he finally said. "Can I come in?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Tell me why you're here, Travis." He exhaled, looked at his shoes, looked back up. "I know I don't deserve to be. I know there isn't anything I can say tonight that fixes what I did. But I needed to see you. I needed to say I'm sorry to your face, not in a room full of other people, just to you." From the kitchen, I heard Patty set something down on the counter, the small sound of her paying attention. "And," I said. Travis blinked. "And what?" "Travis." I kept my voice even. "You called your mother every morning for 3 years to ask if she'd taken her medication. You know what that tells me? It tells me you understand how to think ahead. So I'm asking you, what else did you come here to say tonight?" Something crossed his face, a flash of something that might have been relief that I still knew him well enough to ask, and something else beneath it, darker and more cornered. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He reached in, glanced at the screen with a movement he tried to make casual and didn't quite manage, and shoved it back in his pocket. "Who's calling?" I asked. "Nobody. It's not one also. Travis." He pressed his lips together. The phone buzzed a third time, insistent and rhythmic in his pocket, the buzz of a number that had been calling with regularity and intended to keep doing so. "Where gets the collection agency?" he said, very quietly. "They call in the evenings. They've been calling since before the meeting at Dad's house." I looked at my son standing on my porch with a debt collector ringing in his pocket, and his marriage in a courthouse filing, and his daughter in a house with changed locks, and I felt I want to be precise about this. I felt the specific pain of a parent who loves their child completely and cannot fix what their child has broken. Those are not the same feeling. I had spent 36 years confusing them. I said, I love you. That is not in question, and it is not something you have the ability to change. But I am not going to let you into this house tonight. His face crumpled. Dad, not because I'm punishing you, I said. I want you to hear that. I'm not trying to hurt you. But you need to sit with what you've done long enough to actually understand it. Not long enough to come up with a better explanation. Long enough to understand it. I straightened away from the doorframe. You need to call a gambling counselor. You need to call a debt consolidation attorney. You need to call Claire not to negotiate, just to ask how Sadie is doing, and to mean it. Those things come before this door, and then... His voice cracked down the middle. Then will you let me in? I looked at my son, this man who had once been the reason I worked double shifts and skipped dinners and sold the only thing my father had ever left me, and I felt the truth of what I was about to say before I said it. Then we'll see, I said. That's all I can give you tonight. Then we'll see. I stepped back from the doorway. I took the door in my hand and closed it. Not hard, not with the slam of anger, but firmly and completely, the way you close a door when you mean to close it, and you are not going to open it again tonight. From the kitchen, Patty's footsteps came down the hall. She appeared beside me in the dim entryway, and without saying anything, she put her arm through mine and leaned her head against my shoulder. Outside, after a moment, we heard Travis's footsteps on the porch stairs, then the sound of a car door, then an engine, then nothing but the quiet of our house, which had felt large and wrong with Patty behind a closed door 3 weeks ago, and felt exactly the right size now, with her standing beside me in the dark, her head on my shoulder. The two of us listening to the street outside settle back into its ordinary Thursday evening sounds. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She already knew the answer. After 40 years, she usually did. December came to Columbus quietly that year. The oak tree I'd planted when Travis was 9 had lost its leaves weeks ago, and the cracked bird bath Patty refused to let me throw away sat empty in the frost, waiting for spring and the way everything in Ohio waited patiently without complaint. Jerry Hoffman's Buick pulled up to the curb at 9 on a Saturday morning, 2 months after the meeting at his house. He climbed out with 2 paper cups from Hank's on Bethel Road and came up the porch steps without knocking because 8 weeks of Thursday phone calls and twice weekly coffee had already made invitations redundant between us. Reds won last night, he said, handing me a cup and settling into Patty's chair, the one she had specifically told him he was welcome to use, a dispensation extended 2 weeks after the meeting at their house that Jerry had accepted, with the quiet gratitude of a man who understood what it cost her to offer it. Barely, I said. 3-2 in the 10th. A win's a win. Patty appeared in the doorway, still in her robe, crossword under her arm. She looked at Jerry, looked at the cups, and said, "Gerald Hoffman, did you bring me one?" He reached into his coat pocket and produced a 3rd cup. Milk, 2 sugars. "I've decided I like you," she said, and went back inside. It was the highest compliment Patty Calloway gave before 9 in the morning, and Jerry had learned to receive it as such. Pete had distributed the Q3 returns from the partnership in late March. The check wasn't a fortune, but it meant Patty's Medicaid coverage was a safety net now, rather than a lifeline, and that distinction mattered to me more than I could explain to anyone who hadn't spent 3 days counting pill bottles. The first time Claire brought Sadie over after the separation, the girl came through the front door at a dead run, hit me somewhere around the midsection, and announced she had learned to do a cartwheel and needed to show me immediately. I watched her cartwheel across my living room floor, 3 times the form approximate the enthusiasm absolute, and felt something in my chest unlock that I hadn't known was locked. She came every other Saturday now. In those 6 hours, she ate whatever was in the refrigerator, showed me her drawings, and argued passionately that the robin in the cracked bird bath had a name. Gerald, she said. After Jerry Hoffman. Jerry had been informed of this, and had not yet decided whether to feel flattered or alarmed. The week before, in the middle of a conversation about whether robins migrated, she had looked at me and asked, "Grandpa Gene, do you miss Dad?" I was quiet for a moment. "So I miss who your dad used to be," I said. "And I hope he gets back to being that person. I think he's working on it." She accepted this with the matter-of-fact equanimity of a child who has been given an honest answer and found it sufficient. "He calls me every night," she said. "He always asks about you and Grandma Patty." "I know," I said. "He calls me on Sundays." "Good," she said with the conclusive authority of someone closing a case file. "Then Gerald the robin has a worm. He's very good at this." Travis had been calling on Sundays for 6 weeks. The calls were short 15-20 minutes with no performance in them. He told me what was true, that the gambling counselor he'd been seeing for the past month had given him tools he was using imperfectly, but consistently, that he was working 2 jobs, that the debt was coming down, that Claire had agreed to let him take Sadie one Sunday afternoon a month if the counselor signed off. He didn't ask me for anything. Not once in 2 months. I didn't trust him yet. I want to be honest about that. Trust was not something I was handing because 60 days had gone well. Trust got rebuilt the way a foundation got rebuilt slowly from the ground by someone who showed up and did the work without asking for credit. But I answered the phone. Every Sunday, I answered. Jerry was working a section of Patty's crossword. She left it on the porch table deliberately. I had come to understand the same way she left his chair free and bought an extra magazine on Fridays. Gene. He didn't look up. 7 letters. Starts with H. What holds when everything else gives way? I looked at the elm tree on the corner, putting out its second round of leaves against a sky that had finally stubbornly committed to being blue. Holding, I said. The answer is holding. He wrote it in. From inside came the sound of Patty in the kitchen, the cabinet, the pan, the small and ordinary music of a Saturday morning that had been earned the hard way. I set down my empty cup. The robin was still in the bird bath. The street was still waking up. And somewhere across town, my son was probably making his own coffee, thinking about what kind of man he still had the chance to become. I didn't know if he'd get there, but I knew I was no longer the one who could carry him. That was his work now. Mine was right here on this porch, in this chair, on this ordinary Saturday morning, that felt against all probability like exactly enough. If you've stayed with me this long, then you already know this wasn't really a story about revenge. Not the kind you plan anyway. This is a grandpa story, and every revenge story worth telling writes itself one quiet decision at a time. I spent 36 years believing that love meant never closing the door. I was wrong. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is stand at that door, hold it shut, and say, "Not yet." Not until you've done the work. God didn't put us here to carry grown men who refuse to stand up. He put us here to show them what standing looks like. If your child is taking you for granted right now, if you are shrinking yourself, swallowing your pain, pretending everything is fine so they don't have to feel uncomfortable, please don't do what I did. Don't wait until you're counting your wife's medication like it's the last of something precious. You deserve better. You earned better. This is my truth, and it belongs in every family revenge conversation worth having. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about refusing to disappear. It's about saying I matter quietly, firmly, without apology. These grandpa stories carry that message because someone has to say what too many people are only thinking. And if this revenge story reached your heart the way it reached mine to live it, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there are more grandpa stories where this one came from. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements woven together to illuminate truths that are entirely real. If that's not for you, no hard feelings at all. Go find what feeds your soul.